another one, Lufthansa 405, saw the same sort of thing. And so did British Airways aircraft. You don't read about this in the press. Next, please. This is a PC-3 Orion. This was the aircraft that was said to have been emitting so much electromagnetic radiation by one American researcher. This caused a wire in the tank to pick up the EM and spark, and that's what caused the end of TWA-800. Which, if you recall, the media on this reconstruction, this aircraft, the nose blew off and then the aircraft flew for quite a way and came in. None of that apparently is true. The French knew something was wrong. They had several agents on that aircraft, and there was going to be no diving by the US. The French told Clinton if he didn't actually do it, they would. And that caused him to rush the US Navy to the site. You start seeing the curtains being lifted a little bit here and there. There's been some kind of strange war going on. The world is normal according to all the press, but something's been going on involving high-tech weapons. And if you think about the numbers of bizarre incidents, the Oklahoma City bombing down in the TWA-800, various aircraft going down, aircraft flying off and coming back and saying, look, we've lost control. It was a Boeing 757 that went off Peru now into the Pacific, came back, crashed into a mountain. They could talk. They just said, we no longer have control of the aircraft. Somebody else or something else has got control of it. These sorts of things have been going on now for a few years. Next, please. This is just a reconstruction flight direction of TWA-800 and the Navy P-3 and how they coalesce. And obviously that was the cause of the incident. Next, please. Subsequent, in more recent times, if you do internet searches on the TWA-800 incident, you find it was amazing eyewitness evidence that missiles flew from the ground up to the plane and knocked it out. Next, please. Not EM missiles, ordinary shoulder missiles. And this is where they say they hit. Next, please. And this is a reconstruction of the remains of the aircraft showing the impact site. The interesting thing is the flight recorder at the time of impact suffered complete electrical burnout, as did several other aspects of this. So there is evidence there, if you care to see it, that this aircraft suffered a strike by an electromagnetically charged plasma of enormous intensity. Next, please. Just done a reconstruction of what went on. Next, please. This here is Oklahoma City. The bombing by the terrorist who's since been put to death. And you might at first instance think, yeah, okay, what's that got to do with EMP? I actually went to Oklahoma and interrogated witnesses around that area. Next, please. The one thing that you didn't see in the press was the sheer area of damage. You all saw that earlier photograph, showing two sort of tunnel shapes down the front of the building. Buildings for up to a mile around were flattened, were just steel H-girders the size of this plinth here were twisted like spaghetti. They removed the buildings from around about a square mile. There was a building behind that building which had been built to withstand tornadoes, and it was completely internally smashed. It had suffered massive seismic damage. Behind it was an underground garage with a 6-storey car park. I spoke to the people who ran that, and they said that they were physically thrown by the force of the blast from the entrance of their underground garage 30 yards inside, and then that was the explosion wave. Then there was an implosion wave which came back, and they were sucked back out to where they originally started from. And several of the vehicles in that car park had factory-fitted electromagnetic compasses, and they were all completely thrown out. Several had fuse systems blown. Several computers in offices around that district were blown. Tape recordings of the event record just prior to the blast a very strong spike of electromagnetic interference on the tape recorders. A couple of eyewitnesses recorded odd things. They said there were ribbons of silver, orange, electrical streamers like lightning came out of the top of the building. Others talked about hearing a noise like a loud swarm of bees before there was a double-pronged explosion. Whoomph, out. The building shook, whoomph, in, causing massive damage. Quite weird stuff. The force of that explosion was massive. There's experts who I know who are in the SAS who say, look, the claimed AMFO bomb, the ammonium nitrate diesel oil bomb, sort of stuff we use on gold mines here, bullshit story. Couldn't have done the damage that was there. Plenty of examples of that type of bomb in Northern Ireland. They don't do that. They don't strip districts. All the evidence points to an electromagnetic blast from an orbiting satellite. Internally in the building, survivors came out. I've got this on tape. One guy said, I come from California. I know an earthquake when I experienced it. The building started to shake. I got under my table. There was then a very loud explosion and the building collapsed around me, and that saved my life. A policeman was working at his computer talking to his superior. They both gaped as electrical arcing energy started pouring out of the wires that were going into the computer. And as they watched that, the windows came in and the roof dropped on top of them. The woman on the floor above that said, look, her hair stood on end and there was this immense ionising electrical sensation that poured through the window. Now, I'm afraid I have been unable to find any kind of bomb which has that as a precursor. And don't forget, this happened shortly after the Tokyo subway gassing. There was a lot of activity in '95, including the thing above Perth. So just bear all the time relationships and kind of strange correlations of this stuff. Next one.
Where was this?
This was Oklahoma City, USA. Okay, back to Bearden's typical ABM defence. You launch your ICBM. I'll demonstrate. ICBM launch, you could put the hemisphere there, generated over here. To stop that at launch. You then can hit it with beams, or you can get radar to get its track, and you can put a plasma ball in front of it, hit it there, or up there, or down here, or down here. These nested hemispherical shells cause destruction of the airframe, dudding of the nuclear material, destruction of the electronics on board, and they can happen anywhere in that flight path. Now, where would this sort of research have been done to look at this stuff? Very interesting. The Russians were trying it, but it gets interesting when you look at what's going on in Western Australia, the Great Sandy Desert. So let's go to the next slide. We'll roll into this. This is northwestern Australia. This is the Exmouth Harold Holt American very low frequency submarine quote communication base. And over here is an area of very strange earthquakes. Very isolated region. It's where two young lads met the mysterious death. The two farmhands working on a station died up there a few years ago. There's a house out there in the middle of nowhere surrounded in barbed wire. An oil company called ELF Aquitaine, which is French, which is basically a Rothschild company, commenced exploration there in 1971. Now at that time, that was possibly the most isolated spot in Australia, the most difficult spot to get to. I know what I'm talking about. I've been involved in exploration across the continent. It was also a very odd place to choose because there were much better places available for oil exploration. And funnily enough, when you try to get the reports from the Mines Department on all their exploration, you only get a summary. The actual reports are held under lock and key in Canberra. In Canberra paid 50% of the cost of the exploration project, which is unheard of in oil exploration in Australia. Both those things, the reports under lock and key and the Canberra involvement. They conducted initial ground geophysical testing, including extremely low frequency electromagnetic tests, which are hardly ever used for oil exploration, but they did them. They then drilled a couple of deep drill holes and then they walked away. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is a pattern of earthquakes which began in about 1971. There have been no previous earthquakes recorded in that area of the sandy desert. Each of those squares is 10 kilometres approximately, and you will note that many of those earthquakes sit exactly on the intersection of the squares, and in the centre there is a line of them. See that? See each of these? Like check. Now, the energies involved in those quakes is of the order of 5 to 10 kilotons each. So they're not someone putting an explosive down a drill hole, unless it was a nuclear bomb of significant size. They are very major seismic shakes. The pattern is totally unlike what you would normally get from any other area of earthquake activity. Normally you get a chaotic cluster around the central point. But as you can see there's a very strong organisation to that data. And it just so happens that line there is exactly due east of the Exmouth transmitter site. And it also just so happens that the Exmouth transmitter was finished in 1969 and became operational in 1970, and this began in 1971, very conveniently at the end of summer, and it stopped at the end of winter. Out there you get 50 plus degrees centigrade temperatures, you fry your brains unless you go in the winter period. And the next year it started again in the winter and went through the winter and stopped. And since then, every few years there's a few more, always in winter time. In other words, someone could have been out there looking. Next please. This is a geological map of Cape Holt. It just shows the tip is just above us. This is the actual naval base, and that pentagon up there is the actual main transmitter. There's another one here. So that's the main beach that consists of 3 rings. I'll show you some photographs of it. It's interesting that at the same time as those earthquakes were going on, Woomera was test firing Blue Streak, a British missile, across that region. Military police have been airlifted in and have moved out about 200 Aboriginal people, nomads, and no one was allowed into that area at the time of the tests. And also, the British Blue Streak was mated with another missile, and a satellite was put up by the British. You might not remember this or know it, but the British put a satellite into orbit, as did the European community. It had a European launcher, it had a British base and French and German and Italian stages, and it too launched a satellite, or maybe even 2. But there was quite a lot of missile activity over there, and Aborigines who live out south of there report seeing a silvery aircraft fly over, and then a beam of light flashed down out of the sky and hit the aircraft, and it crashed. And it's still there to this day. And many people report these fireballs flying east from here.